Tell your story.
Change the conversation.
Organized by students. TEDxYouth at SHC.
It's a typical Saturday night. I'm walking up the steps to the front door of my house. I swing it open, and I'm met with the sight of a giddy-looking, floating eyeball who appears to be on his way to a civil rights protest. Nothing out of the ordinary. Not to me, at least. This is just an everyday image in my memory palace. A memory palace is a highly unusual technique which helps you memorize just about anything you didn't think you could, and with incredible effectiveness. Now, for those of you who are completely lost, let me explain. That eyeball I mentioned represents the very first line of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream. The line itself reads, "I am happy to join with you today in what will go down as the greatest demonstration of freedom in the history of our nation." Now, as to how the eyeball could possibly tie into all of that, allow me to explain after some background, of course. The key principle behind the memory palace lies in our brain's aptitude for remembering locations of things. This ability helped early humans remember the most fruitful sources of food or locations of animal dens to keep away from. The information we remembered meant the difference between life and death. Now, let's jump forward to the time of the ancient Greeks, more than 2,800 years ago. In order to memorize lengthy epics, the Greeks harnessed a human aptitude for spatial recognition. They assigned chunks of each epic poem to specific places in the amphitheater that they visualized in their minds. They then retraced their steps and remembered the specific parts of each story. In fact, the phrase "in the first place" traces back to each of these places of their memory palaces. It was in this way that humans memorized thousands of lines of prose and poetry and passed them from generation to generation. Now, on to the present day, and I promise I'll get back around to the giddy political eyeball. The method that the Greeks use has evolved into what is now a blend of the historic method of loci and the brain's ability to remember absurd images. Here's how the memory palace works. Choose a location you're very familiar with. It could be your house, a workplace, walk, or just about anything, and picture it vividly in your mind. Then break down whatever you're trying to memorize into medium-sized chunks, typically of a couple lines. Here comes the fun part. For each chunk, come up with a ridiculous, over-the-top image that relates to the content of what you're trying to memorize. Now, these images should be so zany that you have no problem remembering exactly what they stand for. Now, walk through your chosen location from beginning to end in your mind, placing those absurd images throughout. With practice, as you retrace your imaginary steps, those scenes you envisioned should immediately come to mind, reminding you of the corresponding text. Now, the example I used earlier when referring to Dr. King's speech should hopefully make a little more sense to you, but let me break it down just in case. I am happy to share with you today in what will go down as the greatest demonstration of freedom in the history of our nation. Now you can see why I might have placed this thing behind the front door of my house, right? So if I were to continue memorizing the rest of Dr. King's speech, I would just rinse and repeat this process as I move throughout my house. To me, the single most important part of this somewhat silly process is how it turns memorization, which was such a mundane task before, into something both interesting and engaging. And I'd like for you all to think that I'm not just some nerdy kid on a stage who's enthused about memorization or some sort of memory expert. My father actually discovered this technique when he read the book Moonwalking with Einstein in preparation for my very first speech. Captivated, I sought to put this technique into use immediately. Lo and behold, I was blown away by just how much it extended my memory capabilities. Before, I never could have imagined memorizing all of a 2-minute class presentation without note cards. With the help of my memory palace, I was memorizing speeches upwards of 10 minutes with ease and enjoyment. And the brilliant thing is, each and every one of you has this very ability stored within your own brain, just like me and the ancient Greeks. Think of the next time you're giving a pitch, or maybe the next time you're giving a class presentation of your students. Do you really want to be that person who's reading off the script the whole time? Nobody does. It's just so much more smooth and impressive when it comes straight from your head. Or think of the next time you're at a party. Names. Names are especially hard to remember. And reciting a list of 20 plus names in your head just isn't going to stick. So put the memory palace to use. Create some funky images for each person and stick them in your head. For example, let's say you meet someone named Gabe Hill. Shake his hand, look him up and down, and you notice that he's got a particularly hairy beard. Now, if you were to create a sticky image to place in your memory palace, you might think of Gabe Hill as Abe Lincoln walking up Capitol Hill. These everyday struggles don't need to be such a challenge anymore. The memory palace has so much potential to make many tasks significantly simpler, and if schools could push it as a constructive yet interesting activity, it could help more students by replacing the brutal process of rote memorization. My dad always says to me, do this for yourself now. Your brain will thank you down the line. He'll always say this when doing things like driving to the store without Google Maps or memorizing the grocery list rather than writing it down. But in a world where most memorization-based tasks can be heavily assisted by technology, our brains aren't getting the exercise in the ways that they used to. This trend has spanned human history. In fact, Socrates himself was against books for this very reason. He took an extreme position and believed that by moving away from memorization techniques to the written word, we would weaken our memories. And that was exactly what happened. Nowadays, we can't even drive around our hometowns without GPS. We need a list to remember all of 5 things to buy at the store, and we find ourselves constantly fumbling around in our wallets to read those 23 digits off the backs of our credit cards. So take the challenge. It'll be a lot of fun, I promise. Not only can you amaze your friends and maybe even a prospective employer, but all the while you're strengthening your brain and harnessing your hidden talent. So start putting your brain to use. Your giddy eyeball awaits you at the front steps of your very own memory palace. Thank you.